Well, TVZ Mech is like the only games you ever see anymore. I feel like Zergs are at a stage where they're just like experimenting with different compositions, trying to work out exactly how to beat that mech composition. Because a good mech player just isn't dying at all at the moment. They aren't dying to Rachelins, they aren't dying to Vipers, they aren't dying to anything. So Zergs are in this sort of experimental phase, and they haven't really got it quite yet.
I've seen this really stupid situation where a player like, I think it was Flash? No, Flash got destroyed. It was another, I think it was Bung Bung. No, not Bung Bung. The Terran guy. Byung. Byung.
Pyong.
Opened up and killed 16 or so drones with YOLO Hellions. About 4, yeah, I think it was 4 YOLO Hellions. The Queens were out of position, running, killed a lot of drones. In a TVZ bio game, right, 2 or 3 minutes later, the bio starts to snowball, slowly taking better and better trades, and the Zerg dies in the next 5 minutes, right? I watched Byung kill 16 drones and then sit on his fucking ass for like 30 minutes building battle cruisers against the Zerg, who's now got a 8k, 6k bank and just can't deal with it whatsoever because he wasn't able to pressure it early. So how do you think in HOTS does a Zerg even attempt to deal with it when they've already taken economic damage? Is the only option not taking the economic damage? Because, in a bio game, you would die. In a mech game, should you have the opportunity to come back after losing 2016 drones?
I mean, it's a unit choice, right? Like, the reason why you can come back and do damage against a bio player is because Lings and Banelings can trade out well against bio that isn't properly microed, but they don't have the same effect against Hellions. So that's their big issue. Also against a mech player, if a mech player does damage against a Zerg player, it effectively buys them the time that they need to get up the tools needed to take a much safer third base to propel themselves into the late game. But that being said, I think one of the best ways of dealing with mech was to do that like Ling infester, like Viper style that Life was doing for a bit, right? When the Terran player wants to try and take a fourth or a fifth, and you come in with like anywhere upwards of 15 infestors and like blinding cloud and rush Lings in and then like spill out like endless amounts of infested Terrans and just keep breaking compositions like that. Because you're trading away Lings, which are relatively inefficient. The only thing you really need there is like a solid inject style to make sure you have the lava to reproduce the units. And the second thing is you're just trading out free units, being the energy coming from the infestors. So if you've got rapid fire infested Terran bound, then I think that style was one of the best ways of like at least pulling mech down and not allowing them to bank to make those big transitions, because you kind of need to have access to 8+ gas geysers.
Yeah.
And then Life just sort of stopped doing that. I don't know whether it was because it was the map that did it, because Cactus Valley was the most recent game we've seen Life play against Byung, and he went mech, and he kind of just went around, killed bases, and backed off and went to PCs. But a lot of it was choked. And every fight that I've seen Life take with his Queen Ultralisk Infestor army, they always were getting stuck. And the Queens would create this big arc, and they'd all be shooting nice and slow and transfusing whatever was in the air. But then the Ultralisk would trickle in like 3 at a time, and then die to the Thors on the ground. And then the Infestors would like neural parasite shit and pull the battle cruisers over the top of the Queen army, and then try and use the PCs to shoot each other. And then the rest of the army was still getting bottlenecked and sort of ferried around underneath this like big bulk of Queens because it wasn't in an open space. And I think those were the reasons why he lost that game. Because every fight he took was either in a choke, or the Queens were always like body blocking his Ultralisk army, and then like the Thors were able to deal with it.
I've seen that happen a lot on Terraform, where the Zerg just like attacks into mech, into a choke with Ultras, and just get completely demolished. And then everyone starts complaining about mech on Twitter, and it's like, you just attacked into a choke against the best army that can fight in a choke. It's like...
The problem is that if you don't fight, then they get battle cruisers and ravens and shit, and then you're dead anyway. Like you have to force an engagement, or otherwise the Terran just gets the god tier army up that can't be beaten by Zerg. Like battle cruisers are pretty damn good.
It's hard to deal with them. It just kind of feels like the mules, the fact that you can only have about 30 SCVs mining, just all gas, right? All on the gas guys is on 5-6 bases, a few on minerals, and drop down the mules for the income. Just in terms of supply and army value, the Terran's army is always bigger than the Zerg in that late game, because all the money for Zerg's already in the, like, just sitting in the bank, and he's having 60 drones, because, you know, what composition's going to trade so well that
60.
he doesn't need 60 drones.
More like
drones.
we need like 80 drones.
I mean, you'll have 80 drones and you make 20 spore crawlers. You know, that's the deal. You have the only anti-air for Zerg is spore crawler. You know.
Yeah, you really shouldn't be trying to play like a very high eco game like that against mech. You really need more in the army, more in the queens.
If you don't play high eco, then you're not going to have the resources to remax, because you're not going to. If you're playing against a decent mech player, you're not going to win a single fight. Like, you need to go for things like muta switches or just remaxes if your initial attack did enough damage. Like, we can't play our late game army is just as good as your late game army anymore. We can't do that. Without Swarm Host, we just can't do that, because we're just going to get crushed. We have to finish it before they get God Comp, or we pretty much lose. And especially tied with what Vodge said before about workers, they can have like 30 SCVs on gas, and then they have another 170 supply in units. And then the Zerg only has like maybe 120, 140 maybe, but then that's about it. So not only are their units better, they've got more of them as well.
I think it's too hard to speculate. Go on.
Yeah, you know how maps like King Sejong, I remember like Yoda versus Su. Yoda went mech, and Su just made like 50 corruptors to kill the air army. How come Zergs don't do that anymore?
Broodlord Corruptor.
Yeah.
Thor's Raven Hunter Seeker Missile. Battle cruisers are really good against. I mean, battle cruisers are okay against. Yeah. Corruptors.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Battle cruisers suck against corruptors. Let's be honest.
If battle cruisers, if they're by themselves, they suck. Yeah.
The Ravens just kind of change everything. The Thors as well.
The utility of the AOE is what stuffs Zerg over in so many situations. Because if you just engage with a massive amount of corruptors against battle cruisers,
360
Ravens,
surround and everything. You have the Ravens there and.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also the fact that Zerg upgrades aren't as flexible as Terran upgrades. Yeah, like mech upgrades are just mech upgrades. That upgrades your ground army and your air army. If you're a Zerg, you have to put upgrades into ranged melee carapace, and then you have to put more upgrades into +1 air and +1 carapace as well. And then if you want Broodlords, you have to go get the Greater Spire and stuff like that as well. And it takes longer for us to get those upgrades, because we need to go high. No, we have to go spawning pool, lair. No, we go spawning pool. We get our Evo chambers, then 1-1. Then we have to get lair for 2-2. Then we need to build an infestation pit. Then we need to build a hive, and then we can get 3-3 for whatever. Whereas the Terran just needs to once they get the factory out, then their 2-2 and 3-3 can just be built straight away. There's no tier 3 building that needs to be built for Terran to get their 3-3 out, even for mech. So yeah, that's my reasoning.
Fair enough.
I feel inclined to disagree, mostly because every time I see ZVT mech games, the Zerg always has a bank, so it's kind of like, what's your excuse for not having the upgrades other than complacency?
It's more just time. Right, those things
it's time.
take
that was my
3
argument.
minutes each, and your Spire goes down at 10:30 if you went lair before 1-1, and then your first +1 attack finishes at 12 minutes, +2 attack finishes 14 minutes, and by the time it's 20 minutes, you've got 2-2, sure, but your opponent's at 3-3 for about 5-6 minutes.
Yeah, because think about it. To open up. For a Terran to open up the possibility to get 3-3 is 100 gas to build an armory, right? Or is it 150 gas for an armory?
100.
100 gas.
Yeah,
To open up the possibility for 2-2 and 3-3, it's 100 gas. For Zerg to open up the possibility of 2-2 and 3-3, it's the cost of lair, infestation pit, and hive.
And the Spire as well.
And then the upgrades are separate. They're not together, they're separate.
I mean, or maybe it comes more down to a refinement on how Zerg want to counter mech and at what stage they want to attack the mech player then. If it's a delegation of resources and time by that point. I mean, because you see Zergs kind of juggle it up. They're like, oh, I'm going to go for this big ground-based army and go for melee upgrades because I'm going to go to Queen Ultra. And then they realize that the timing for that is completely expired, right? So then they're trying to strangle together the time and resources to go for the double Spire play and try and get the air army out in time for to try and catch onto the Terran air switch. And then that's the problem that you're talking about now, where it's like they could go mass corruptor, but they'd be so inefficiently upgraded that they would just be like paperweights going at the Terran army at that point. So maybe it's a delegation of resources.
You can't get all you can't just get all the upgrades straight away. Like imagine dumping all your gas into Lair, Infestation Pit, Hive, 1-1 for ranged melee and carapace, and then 1-1 again for air and carapace. That's going to soak up so much gas, and you're not going to have an army for ages. Sure, you might have all the like even then, like meter switches are so difficult to do as well because you need to get your upgrades for your ground army, and then you need to get the Spire and then upgrades for that as well. So you can't be upgrading everything at the same time, or otherwise you're just going to have no army. You're going to have a lot of upgrades, but you're going to have no army. Like the fact that they combined, I think now that the Swarm Host is gone, they need to re-separate ground and air upgrades.
Yeah, because that was just a reaction to the fact that Swarm Host was just so, efficient.
So good against mech. Yeah, it was, because there was a period where Swarm Host was just crush mech. Like, mech was complete trash because of Swarm Host. But then players like Avillo started popularizing the big turtle styles and stuff like that. But I think if mech wants to be balanced, it needs to separate. It needs to be separated, because then Zerg, Zerg is very, we're the reactionary race. We rely on seeing what the enemy is doing and then reacting to that with whatever composition we deem sufficient enough to deal with it. But if they can just do whatever, like they just put down starports and factories, like there's no discretion. It's just, I'm just going to chuck down starports and factories, build Vikings and tanks and Ravens and stuff like that. Like there's no what army composition is he going for and how do I react? It's just he's going mech. And try and kill him before he gets BC.
But there are two versions of mech in TVZ. There's the heavy Raven style, or there's the high Viking tank into BC style.
Which is what I've put on stream right now. Innovation does the mass Viking tank.
And I think, obviously, versing the Raven style, Infestors are really good. We've seen many a time Pig just kind of crush the style where the Terran fucks up and gets chain fungled like a lot. And some might call bullshit on that because I've watched like 3k worth of gas explode within 5 fungals and been very, very sad about it. But the reaction to that style compared to this style is very different from my perspective. I think tackling the heavier Viking BC style, you definitely could just go for the mass corruptor style. So maybe it's a scouting thing like that. And I think that might also be very unfair to say because it's very difficult to ascertain whether or not the Terran player is going for a heavy Raven style unless you catch it early. Right? Like you can sit there and realize that the Terran's adding on Ravens much earlier. They're not just adding tanks and PFs. So maybe that's the cue you need to look out for to start your Spire transition on time. Rather than trying to play like Roach Hydra Viper and try and land fungals. Because Infestors aren't anywhere near as good versus, I think, the style that Innovation does because the tank support is too strong.
Because they removed the Raven bonus as well, the damage on the bonus. Oh, poor life, look at Innovation.
The only place Infestors have in ZV Mech is trying to get a fungal on the Raven Viking ball. That's pretty much it. Right, otherwise, Neural's pretty useless because the range is so short. Like whenever you try neuraling something, it'll just die to whatever's shooting. And they need to be like in front of the army to be able to neural anything, and because they're already being targeted instantly because they're at the front, they kind of just die.
Alright, let's kind of sum this up because we got to talk about TVP, man.
I just want to add one quick thing. There's one thing that I tried to suggest a long time ago on the Blizzard forums was to make Neural Parasite a projectile. Something that the Zerg spellcaster could shoot at a unit, it would latch onto the unit and then control it for a set amount of time, and then maybe you had to shoot it off. So it was like something,
kind of thing, or?
yeah, like a skill shot thing. So it would be the size of like a PDT. It would attach itself onto said unit that the Zerg would shoot this projectile at it to control it, and the units would have to shoot it off in order to regain control, rather than it being this weird-ass long penis thing that attaches itself to said unit and just sits there like ejaculating into it until it dies.
I reckon that would be incredibly powerful. I think that would be a bit too overpowered. You could kind of just launch neurals, run away, and then let the Terran army fight itself.
Well, wouldn't that be a much better use?
And like things like skill shots as well, like adding too many spells into this game for everything has always been, I think, a bit of a bane of StarCraft, where too many spells... Like, StarCraft's always been an elegant game where things like unit damage, range, and movement speed, that's how units interact with each other. But it kind of feels like everything's just a friggin' spellcaster. And skill shots, it's like... I mean, we've never tried skill shots, and I've never really thought about skill shots that much, so me commenting on it feels a little... should be taken with a grain of salt, but skill shots seem a little like we've already kind of got a skill shot with the fungal, and it feels very clunky to use sometimes.
But I mean, it'd be more or less the same thing, right? Except it just wouldn't be physically attached to the infestor anymore, so therefore, I don't know,
it's
like the risk of using it's a little bit better.
We still end up coming back to, like, spellcasters fix everything. You know?
Yeah,
like,
it feels like we're relying on a gimmicky spellcaster type of thing.
Because so far, what does Zerg do against Mech, right? The thing that I've seen, like... I think the best anti-Mech player that I've seen is probably Cats. And just bear with me for a second, you know, Root Cats. The way he deals with Mech is probably the way, right? He doesn't do it to the highest level, but the way he deals with it is he trades energy for anything of Mech. So fungals, abducts into spores, transfuses, counterattacks with transfusions, things like that, fighting against single Vikings, some tanks here and there, some Thors, and slowly picking it apart. You've seen a lot of players, I think Pig has done it on his stream, not so much like a turtle style, but, you know, trading slowly units over time. It just feels like Zerg relies on these spellcasters so much. Is the answer more spellcasters? Why is there not, like, an immortal for Zerg? Maybe not to the same, you know, length.
Well, I think the Ultralisk is meant to be the immortal for Zerg, but like Ultras were always meant to be this big heavy hitter frontline unit which can like smash through front lines and stuff, but the Ultralisk, like, they're too big and fat. Like, they're, like, I'm sorry, like, not to be too, like, mean to them or anything, but yeah, they're really clunky, and the AI is shit, and they kind of just collapse to anything, really. Like, it's hard to say. Like, to be honest, I liked ZV Mech before the Swarm Host nerf. I always thought casters did a bad job at, like, showing the audience where the kind of like where, I don't know, it's hard to explain. So I think casters always did a bad job at showing how intricate Swarm Host games were, because they always just saw the free units of the Locust, and they're just like, oh, it's just free units, blah 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 blah. But like at the end of the Swarm Host era, ZV Mech turned into this intricate dance of, here's the Zerg front line, here's the Terran front line, and you're kind of constantly trading back and forth with these spells. Like, you're constantly trying to abduct Ravens and Vikings, and the Vikings are constantly trying to get shots off on the Vipers. And then there's sometimes Zerg can do their own big push where they decide to go on with, like, Swarm Hosts coming in from two different angles, and you simultaneously put down blinding clouds, trying to keep the Viking Ravenfall back with fungals, and then spam your infested Terrans all over the place.
Then the side is on the Terran, right? Like, so look at it now. The Zerg ends up using all these spellcasters against the Terran to maybe deal with this death ball. When Terran got their battle cruiser, Raven, Viking, tank against tween Swarm Hosts, a bunch of units with Spore Crawlers, neither of them could really attack into each other. It ended up being like a chess game, where it should have been a draw, because everyone kind of has played perfectly and so passively that they've both ended up with the exact, the same pieces and can't really attack into each other's position. Otherwise, they lose the game.
I've never seen chess games that are that turn into stalemates or anything like that. Like that happens very rarely, and I felt like that happened rarely as well. Like players were constantly stabbing at each other with the spellcasters, and like the two front lines kind of made it so it wasn't just one army smashes the other and then walks through. It was this constant intricate trading of units using spellcasters, and I honestly didn't think it was that badly designed. I actually enjoyed it, you know, like you had options of going for big pushes or options of just playing a little bit more passively and just abducting things every now and then it becomes a game as well of who's paying attention, who's got the better mechanics, who's got the better understanding of control and stuff like that. Whereas now it's like, I don't know, the Terran just turtles and the Zerg water just washes upon the wall of Terran and gives it a nice sparkle at the end of it.
Alright, let's try to like sum it up then. Post Swarm Host nerf, how do we look at CVT Mech right now? Let's start with Nama, because he had the least to say about everything.
Yeah, I think at the moment Mech is pretty strong, but I think it's just the maps and the fact that Zerg haven't worked out a way to deal with it yet.
Yeah, I think, like Nama does have a point there where it's like, because Zerg is the reactionary race, there's always that little time period where if something new comes out, we need to figure it out first before we start beating it. Like, I think that's always been the thing with Zerg. They need to figure things out before they start effectively fighting against it. But I think a lot of things have been tried, and nothing seems to be quite as consistent as Swarm Hosts.
Yeah. What about you, Josh? What do you think? Final thoughts?
No, I totally agree. I think that it's in a stage still where it's being sort of figured out different ways on how to open to maybe abuse potential mech openers, because the second strength to mech is a Terran player isn't necessarily always going to go mech, yeah? So like a Terran player that is competent with both styles is probably the most to be feared.
Yeah.
Because they could switch it up. You can't just blindly go roaches in anticipation to do early damage and then gain a lead from that to be able to snowball and kill the mech before it's like the powerhouse is up and running, out of fear of maybe he goes bio and then all of a sudden my army just really isn't trading very well through the mid game and then I get counter snowballed and died. So I think that's probably the hardest thing, like being really on top of scouting, maybe even knowing the player a little bit more, or finding some kind of dynamic opening that allows Zerg to kind of have the best of both worlds and have as much smoother transition to deal with either composition. Everyone should just basically adopt what Dark does. Just go Ling Bane, Roach, Corruptor. And you'll have no issues. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's cool that we can sum it up. I hope you guys are right in that Zerg just needs to kind of figure it out. I'm kind of stuck on the ladder by myself, at least, when I'm going onto the ladder, especially in hot, not only in hots. I go against Mech, and it just kind of feels like there's no real answer. Maybe that's because no one's really, conceptually come up with the idea of how to deal with it. But let's hope that something comes out of the woodworks and we're able to deal with that turtling Mech style. Let's move on to TVP now, where